These are the planes that won the Battle of Midway, that bombed the heart out of Hitler's Germany. The planes that fought the air war over the jungles of Indochina and the deserts of Iraq. These are the planes that define the meaning of air power. These are the legends of air combat.
The concept of transporting the injured by aircraft has its origins in the military, and the concept of using aircraft as ambulances is almost as old as powered flight itself. The first documented use of an air ambulance occurred during the Siege of Paris in 1870, when balloons were used to evacuate more than 160 soldiers from the besieged city. During the Great War, the first true air ambulance flight was made when a Serbian officer was flown from the battlefield to hospital by a plane of the French Air Service. Records kept by the French at the time indicated that for casualties evacuated by air within 6 hours of injury, the mortality rate among the wounded fell from 60% to less than 10%, a staggering reduction. During the First World War, air ambulances were tested by various military organizations. Aircraft were still primitive at the time, with limited capabilities, and the effort received mixed reviews. The first recorded ambulance flight took place in 1917 in Turkey, when a soldier in the Camel Corps who had been shot in the ankle was flown to hospital in a de Havilland DHH within 45 minutes. The exploration of the idea continued, however, and by 1936, an organized military air ambulance service was evacuating wounded from the Spanish Civil War for medical treatment in Nazi Germany. During World War II, helicopters were used for numerous light utility duties such as scouting, and when launched from ships, they searched for convoys or submarines. The first documented medevac by helicopter occurred during the Second World War. In April 1944, a U.S. Army Air Force aircraft with 3 wounded British soldiers on board was forced down in the jungle behind Japanese lines near Malu in Burma. A new U.S. Army Sikorsky YR-4B helicopter, flown by Lieutenant Carter Harmon, could carry only 1 passenger. But over April 25th and 26, 1944, Harmon made 4 return trips to extract everyone. They also carried out a large medevac operation in June 1945, when helicopters airlifted at least 70 wounded soldiers from the front lines in Lausanne to rear area hospitals, marking the first time that U.S. helicopters came under concentrated enemy fire. But few helicopters, either German or American, made it into frontline service. That changed by the time the Korean War took place. Korea proved the practicality of evacuation by helicopter, direct from combat zones to medical facilities. In a matter of hours, a casualty could be in a long-range transport aircraft, fully staffed with trained medical personnel, for a swift trip to major medical centers in Japan or even the United States. A whole new concept of casualty evacuation was born. 2 helicopters, the Bell 47, designated the H-13 by the military, and the Sikorsky S-51, designated the H-5 by the military, were the primary rescue helicopters in the Korean War. The Sikorsky S-51 helicopters were pressed into service early in the war as aerial ambulances. These helicopters could carry 2 crew members and a wounded soldier. There was so little room in the narrow fuselage for the stretcher that the soldier's legs stuck out the side of the helicopter from the knees down. The history of the Bell 47 began in November 1941. when the somewhat eccentric inventor Arthur Young and his assistant Bartram Kelly persuaded Bell Aircraft Corporation of Buffalo, New York to sponsor the development of a helicopter. Young designated it the Model 30. The craft made its first untethered flight in June 1943. It had a single two-bladed rotor and a small vertical propeller at the tail. In April 1945, the third Model 30 made its flight, demonstrating many of the characteristics that were soon incorporated into the Model 47, which flew on December 8, 1945. The first dedicated use of helicopters by U.S. forces occurred during the Korean War, during the period from 1950 to 1953. On August 4, 1950, just 1 month after the start of the Korean War, the first rotor wing medical evacuation was performed with a bubble-fronted Bell 47. Soon the H-13, which was regularly serving in a light utility and observation role, was converted to a flying ambulance, ferrying wounded troops from the front lines to mobile Army surgical hospitals, MASH, that were often far from the front. The Bell 47H-13 had a two-seat cockpit enclosed by a distinctive plastic bubble. The two-bladed rotor made a chop-chop sound, leading to the nickname Chopper for helicopters. While popularly depicted as simply removing casualties from the battlefield, helicopters also expanded their services to moving critical patients to more advanced hospital ships once initial emergency treatment in field hospitals had occurred. The Army fitted stretchers on both sides of the cockpit, outside of the cockpit, atop the landing skids, so a pilot could carry the wounded soldiers to medical help. They were covered with blankets in a nearly futile effort to maintain body heat and prevent wound contamination. Small plastic bubbles were fitted at the fronts of the stretchers to protect the men's heads. It was a cold and windy ride for the wounded soldiers, but it meant they would be rushed to a team of trained doctors working in a well-equipped hospital room. The alternative was first aid at the battlefield and a long, bumpy ride to a field hospital. However, the limited carrying capacity of these small helicopters and their slow speed were clear drawbacks for military use. It is estimated that more than 20,000 injured soldiers were evacuated by helicopter. The World War II casualty death rate of 4.5 deaths per 100 casualties dropped to 2.5 per 100 casualties during the Korean War. While there were some technological advances in medicine during that period, the improvement is largely attributed to the use of helicopters to evacuate patients to definitive care more quickly. The external litter, however, did not allow for medical care during transport. Because Korea had a relatively fixed battlefront during the second half of the war, MASH units could be located near the front, and the helicopters did not have to fly far or for long periods of time when transporting their wounded. This was not the case only a few years later in Vietnam, where there were no clear front lines, and Medevac helicopters often had to fly into battles to retrieve the wounded and carry them great distances to medical help. By the mid-1950s, the U.S. Army began searching for a replacement Medevac aircraft for the Bell Model 47, and soon selected the Bell Model HU-1A Huey. The Model 205 prototype flew on August 16, 1961. 7 pre-production prototype aircraft had been delivered for testing at Edwards Air Force Base, starting in March 1961. The 205 was initially equipped with a 44-foot main rotor and a Lycoming T-50L9 engine with 1,100 horsepower. The rotor was lengthened to 48 feet. In 1966, Bell installed the 1,400 horsepower Lycoming T-53L13 engine to provide more power for the aircraft. Production models in this configuration were designated as the UH-1H. The next major advance in AM transport occurred during the Vietnam War, where the Bell HU-1 helicopter was placed into operation. For Jack Teasing, flying the HU-1 in Vietnam was a graduate school in flying.
Basically, we unloaded the aircraft, put them together, test flew them, and again, most of the guys I flew with had been there before. So I'm flying with second tour boys that were very, very good at what they did and showed you how to do things with that UH-1 that was not taught to you in flight school. I remember one captain telling me, he said, "You're probably not going to make it out of here alive, but listen to what I have to tell you, and let me show you how to do this, and maybe you'll have a better chance at it." So that was a real sobering speech this guy made before we climbed into the cockpit, and I was all ears and eyes. Basically, yes or no, sir, show me what you have so I can stay alive. And lessons well learned, which you pass on again to somebody else as they come on board.
The medic who flew into hell with the Huey pilots often did not have the luxury of an experienced voice to show them the ropes.
You were popped out of a helicopter, just kind of thrown out there with your bags and that, and you're there, you're out there. You know, you didn't know what anything was about or anything like that. You were the medic. One medic was with each platoon. The next day I went with the mortar platoon, and that first mission, the next day mission, was reality. Going after this, I don't like using the terms, but crispy critters, a couple guys down in a helicopter, going out looking for them and stuff like that, and that's when it hit, and it said, then you wondered, what the heck? And like I said, I had some age going for me, but I had one plus being a medic, because right away then, you had a job. You know, these kids that were infantrymen and people like that, those poor guys, you know, they had jobs, but, you know, at least what I could do is I could hide behind my job. I could say, well, I have no idea what this Vietnam thing is, who that poor guy is we're shooting at or anything like that, but I'm here to take care of my man. And I always thank the dear Lord for that. I always thank being a medic. I carried a weapon. I carried a 45 in plastic, you know, so it wouldn't get wet. And I think I only had to take it out one time, and thank God the poor guy that I was taken out to was just as young and scared, and he took off. You know, I was always very, very happy that I was a medic.
Affectionately known as the Huey, this aircraft was large enough to hold patients inside, where medical personnel could begin treatment during the flight to a field hospital. The mass deployment of these aircraft as medevac units reduced the average delay of treatment to 1 hour. The ability to carry patients inside the aircraft was a key element in the reduction of mortality and morbidity. Military medics performed procedures previously done only by physicians. They started central lines, inserted chest tubes, and sutured bleeding wounds. This care, coupled with the initiation of specialty hospitals for the treatment of different types of injuries, resulted in a reduction in the mortality rate to 1 death per 100 casualties. While early short-body Hueys were a success, the Army wanted a version that could carry more troops and wounded soldiers. Bell's solution was to stretch the HU-1B fuselage by 41 inches and use the extra space to fit 4 seats next to the transmission facing out. Seating capacity increased to 15, including crew. The enlarged cabin could also accommodate 6 stretchers and a medic, 2 more than the earlier models. In place of the earlier model's sliding side doors with a single window, larger doors were fitted, which had 2 windows plus a small hinged panel with an optional window providing access to the cabin. The doors and hinged panels were quickly removable, allowing the Huey to be flown in a doors-off configuration. In early 1962, the 57th Medical Detachment Helicopter Ambulance went to Vietnam to provide medevac service to the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVN forces. The unit's Hueys often had large red crosses painted on their sides and nose. The Hueys quickly became the primary medevac helicopter of the war. The medevac Hueys were known by their radio call sign, Dust Off, for the dirt they kicked up as they took the wounded to safety. Most served in the Army, although both the Navy and Marines used their Hueys for similar tasks. Although almost never armed, dust-off Hueys sometimes dropped off supplies, and even ammunition to troops in the field, what one pilot referred to as preventive medicine. They frequently came under fire, and many were shot down. The large red crosses on their sides did not provide them with immunity. Dust-off pilots often earned reputations for immense bravery, risking themselves and their aircraft to remove wounded soldiers during intense firefights. The dust-off call sign was acquired by the Medevac units in Vietnam in January 1964, ironically and quite appropriately by way of medical necessity. The occasion was a bloody two-day operation west of Saigon near the Cambodian border in early January 1964. At the time, all combat units utilized randomly selected call signs controlled by the Navy Support Activity Vietnam, which were changed periodically in accordance with signal operating instructions in the interest of security. The call sign of 57th Med Detachment on that day happened to be Dust Off. Fighting was heavy, casualties were mounting, evacs were continuous, and communication between the evac helicopters and ground commanders was overwhelming. At the time that the code changeover was ordered to occur, the major ground commander as well as the Medevac air crews became concerned that, due to the battlefield chaos, switching to a new call sign may jeopardize evacuation. At the request of the ground commander, the 57th Med Commander agreed immediately to delay the call sign changeover. After the operation, it was decided that a permanent aeromedical evacuation call sign would help avoid possible future mission impairment. Within a few days, official approval was received for the permanent call sign change to Dust Off. The war in Vietnam was fought against the deadly combination of a hostile environment and an elusive enemy. The long, narrow, mountainous country, covered with jungle and brush, crisscrossed by rivers and streams, and drenched by summer and winter monsoons, provided natural hideouts for Viet Cong guerrillas. The battles had no fixed fronts. The adversary knew no fixed rules. To deal with the enemy, our soldiers had first to find him, through the tall grass, across the unspanned rivers, into the dense jungle, constantly facing hidden dangers, a booby trap, a buried mine, a sniper, a sudden ambush. From the moment a soldier was hit, no time was lost before the dust-off call went out. Time has always been an enemy for men wounded in combat. In Vietnam, this race against time was partly won by the helicopter and by advances in treatment. It was the men and women of the medical services that carried the crucial burden in the wounded soldiers' fight for life. The Medevac pilots were a rare breed with an absolute love of flying.
I loved aviation, I guess, since I was a little kid. For some reason, I knew that I had a fascination with flying machines, and I really never planned on flying helicopters. I wanted to be a fighter pilot and join this. I was in uniform most of my life, Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, Civil Air Patrol, ROTC at the University of Connecticut. For some reason, I felt comfortable there. But I always had a fascination for aircraft, and I always knew I wanted to fly. And as I got older, it got to the point I didn't care who I flew for. As long as I was a military aviator, that's what I wanted. And the Army afforded me the chance to go from high school to flight school. And I had planned, again, to possibly apply for naval aviation, but I was like a semester short. And looked into the Army, and it looked good.
From the moment a soldier was hit, no time was lost. The burden of an extra minute could break the thin thread of life. The fights for life began with the medics who served with the ground units. Even in the middle of the fight, the medics were there to give first aid to the fallen soldier. While giving whatever medical help they could offer in the field, the medic would order the radio operator to call for a dust-off.
Raider Alpha 6, long bid dust-off control, over.
This is Raider Alpha 6. I have an urgent dust-off mission. Coordinates Yankee Uniform 607, 8, 9, or 5.
That call for help would send the medevacs racing to the aid of the ground troops. The average flight time from the LZ pickup to any well-staffed and equipped medical facility was 1 hour or less.
To this day, I can hear a Huey. I mean, it's a very distinct sound, and that's what the dust-off pilots used. And I must say I give all the credit in the world. My heroes of Vietnam are the combat medics and the dust-off pilots, because they saved so many lives just by putting a chopper down in a place where no one thought they could ever put a chopper, and getting those victims on that chopper and getting them to the hospitals as quickly as they did.
The medevac helicopters lifted off to beat the clock when a young soldier's life hung in the balance, but they did not go into harm's way alone.
Every time we took off on a medevac, we had a Huey gunship that supported us, and they flew behind us when we went out. As soon as we took off, they took off behind us, and in case we needed help, we would call and tell them where the enemy was shooting at us from, and so forth like that.
Sometimes the extra firepower was not enough to protect the unarmed dust-off.
I think my first experience with medevac was up in I-Corps in the mountains, and I pulled some night medevac in the mountains, and that's hairy.
Night flying in the days before night vision was not for the faint of heart.
We had not only daylight missions with the helicopters, but we had night missions. We would fly 2 helicopters at night, medevac, every night. There'd be 2 helicopters be set aside that would be going out and flying night missions, and they called you any time of the night or day if you were on medevac. You worked a complete 24-hour shift.
Night mountain flying without much illumination, unless you know the area of operation real well, will get you killed because you're flying around mountains and stuff like that. But we had people that were hit. They had a fire base under a mortar attack, and they scrambled myself and another chief warrant officer. And he'd been there before, although I did most of the flying. And we had to go into a saddle between 2 artillery batteries where we had to pick up the wounded. And it was dark, and we landed to a strobe light. Basically what they do is they put a little light that would blink, and you land to that.
A night landing at a mountain base under enemy fire was a challenge for even a veteran pilot. For Jack Teasing, this was a very dangerous time to be receiving on-the-job training.
And I remember making the approach, and we turned off all our lights. I think I hit the landing light really quickly just before I touched down to see where I was landing, and shut it off. I don't think the mortar attack was up more than a minute, maybe 2, before we went in. And I remember sitting there between the saddle, waiting for them to bring the wounded down, and we were at full RPM thinking they're going to drop one right down on these blades. I mean, I'm not going to make it out of here. I'm just praying they're not going to hit us again.
We were getting battled pretty bad, really bad one night. Just soldiers getting killed left and right, and we had helicopters keep coming in. And Ghost Rider was the one guy's name. He didn't care. He wasn't a medevac, but he was going to come in and he was going to get my people. And he came in 4 different times to come in and get my people. And the last time I was wounded, I didn't know it at the time, and he got hit.
The flashing light was certain to draw the attention of enemy gunners.
Knowing they saw the landing light come on, and knowing they were reloading the mortar tubes, and I'm thinking, I don't know why I'm doing this for a living, but if I ever get out of this alive, I will go to church every Sunday, and you're making all kinds of pacts with God to see if you can get through this. And all of a sudden you look up, and here they come running down with the stretchers and the guys with the bottles in them, and you put them on board, and you grab a handful of pitch, and you're out of here thinking, oh, man, how did I get through this one?
Just as the wounded soldier was placed on the Huey, all hell broke loose. The chopper began to lift off. Teasing was lucky, but his co-pilot was not.
The bullets came through the cockpit, and I thought they went underneath his chicken plate, and he slumped over on the controls.
There was also extensive damage to the ship.
Little did I know I had battle damage in the tail rotor section. Well, I had another ship come up when I said I was hit, and another ship come up, looked me over, and I wasn't leaking any fluid, so I looked down and said everything was in the green.
Teasing was now facing a situation that his training never covered.
When it was going on, I just remember saying to myself, I know I'm going to die, but I'm very busy. I remember saying that. And the tower kept screaming, what was the matter? And I didn't have time to talk to him. I had an airplane that was totally out of control. And, you know, it's kind of an instantaneous course on how to fly an aircraft out of control. They didn't cover that in flight school, by the way.
You hear the radios, dust off. Dust off is calling our hospital and telling us where they are, how many casualties they got, what kind they are, and how far away they are, what their, you know, ETA 4 minutes or whatever, and what kind of injuries they have, so we know what to get the doctor, the triage officer ready.
And we went to the hospital area, and there was already a helicopter on the pad, and I chose not to land there. There was 2-story buildings all around the helipad there at the hospital.
Our hospital was on a bluff about 85 feet high, overlooking the South China Sea, and the helipad was right outside the door to the emergency room, so that when the helicopters started coming in, the wind, of course, from the propellers just blew right through the emergency room, and you could hear them. To this day, I can hear a Huey.
With a wounded ship and another bird on the pad, Teasing had to find some place to set Huey and his wounded Marine down.
So I decided to land over a ditch, and of course this kid still slumped over the controls, and there was nobody on board with me and the crew. And we got down to bottom, and I don't know what snapped back there, but I lost my tail rotor. I don't know whether I lost the shaft or the control. I had no idea. There was no way of knowing. And she started to spin out of the control. Well, I couldn't do a hovering out of rotation because I was over a ditch and I was next to the hospital. And if I'd have rolled this thing in a ball, I'd have killed everybody in the hospital. So I opted to go back in the air.
As Teasing tried to get some air under his ship, the wounded helicopter began to fight back.
And at this time, the airplane's going out of control, going round and round, and I'm trying to learn how to fly a helicopter without the tail rotor controls, and it's quite an interesting experience. And the guy next to me who decides to wake up and get on the controls with me, which is a no-no. And we went round and round, and finally I landed the aircraft, and right there at the hospital area, where I wasn't going to land in the first place, and they took him into the hospital, and I shut the aircraft down and got out and sat down and couldn't get up.
You hear that Huey coming, whether you're on duty or not, you hear it coming, and the first thing you do is run to the emergency room to see, if you're not on duty, to see if they need extra help, or how many casualties do they have coming. And you stand at the door and you watch the chopper land, and the medics run out. Whoever's available runs out to the chopper to start bringing the gurneys in.
With his wounded soldiers in the hands of the medical team, the impact of what had just happened left Teasing paralyzed.
I remember a bunch of guys from the area came over and wanted to talk to me. I just could not stand up. They had to help me up. I guess that was the worst I ever physically felt as far as being afraid. And I can't remember how long that was. It might have been 10 minutes. It might have been a half hour. I know I finally obviously did get up, but I was pretty afraid.
Every day, several times a day, for 13 long months or until they were killed, the Medevac pilots flew their missions of mercy.
During my time in Vietnam, I was there 13 months, and I flew something over 1,300 hours of flight time. So I had a lot of long, busy days.
That was one of my worst ones. I didn't think I'd be able to talk about it, but I guess I can. That was one of my worst ones. I was supposed to get on this aircraft and go in later, and my buddy said, why don't you go get the beer? You go on the first one. And I went on the first one, and then probably what happened, we had a lot of terrible, goofy accidents. We got killed a lot by our own crap, our own stuff, you know. And I waited about an hour and a half, and my buddy wasn't coming on any of his aircrafts. And finally, me and a priest went down to one of the tents, and we found his body where he got blown up. Those are the things, you know, and you don't know why. You got your friend laying in a tent, you know, the death tent, you know, and you're going by looking, and you got Vietnamese there, the enemy. And they're treating him almost better or something, you know. It's probably all up in here. That was bad. That was rough. I started kicking a few of those, and I'm not a violent person at all. And that's when the chaplain took me. The chaplains are really aces as far as I'm going. And That was my roughest. That was my roughest. Young kid from Alabama that was a conscientious objector, changed his mind. He carried a .45, and I lost him. And he was one of my best buddies. That's the one that went on the aircraft after me. That wasn't easy. But you pop back. You pop back because you got to take care of those others. That's the thing. You had that other. I mean, I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have that job. And then once we got back to the base where we were at, I sat on this little ammo can, crying, thinking that I'm gonna be in trouble, you know, because I was with that aircraft, and I didn't leave my people, but I needed to. This was something I pulled, and then I found out that I was going to be awarded all this stuff and everything, and that the wound was the butt wound. And I tell you, there's nothing. The butt wound just doesn't get you. That's one of those Purple Hearts you don't talk a lot when you get hit in the butt.
You see other wounded soldiers that are the walking wounded helping another one of their buddies or wanting to carry a litter. They bring them in and they start lining them up, and you just go to the first litter and wait for the triage officer to try to tell you who needs, who's in what category, who needs care, who can, what can we do for whomever. Of course, the worst category was the expectant. And those were the troops that we knew that were going to die no matter what we did for them. And probably the hardest job there was the job of the triage officer. And when a doctor wasn't available to do it, a nurse had to do it. And to make that decision, no matter what we do for this guy, he's going to die. And if we put him over in a litter in the corner and take care of 20 other guys, we can save lives rather than taking several hours to take care of one guy that's going to die anyway. And that was the hardest part. That was the part that where you begin to question, what am I here for? What value? What am I doing? If I can't take care of this one person and make a difference, maybe I shouldn't be here. Maybe I can't really make a difference with anybody.
Sometimes the greatest service the nurses provided had nothing to do with saving lives.
I might be there for 4 or 5 hours, and then all of a sudden another nurse would show up. And we would just sit there at their bedside and hold their hand, talk to them until they died, just so they wouldn't be alone.
Sometimes death was not that easy.
The ones that were very gut-wrenching were the troops that came in on the chopper that were still conscious, that had lost a leg, and they're grabbing you and saying, "Nurse, don't let me die, nurse, don't let me die. Nurse, my leg hurts," and they don't have a leg. And it's trying to deal with them was emotionally as gut-wrenching as staying by the bedside of a troop that was dying.
The success of the Hueys meant that grunts who would have died on the battlefield in past wars now made it to the hospitals. But the sight of these twisted and broken bodies left a terrible impression on the medical teams.
People ask me today, how did you survive Vietnam? How did you survive the carnage of every day? Every day was a mass casualty. Every day it was one body after another that had bits and pieces blown apart or major parts missing. And I tell people to this day, the only way I can survive was just to turn myself off.
By the 1980s, the U.S. Army began replacing the Huey with the Sikorsky UH-60 Blackhawk in the Medevac role. The military's requirement was the ability to carry a greater number of wounded, and the Blackhawk's larger fuselage and higher speed compared to the Huey made it highly valuable in 1991 during Operation Desert Storm. But the Army also changed tactics. Medevac helicopters no longer went into firefights to retrieve the wounded. Instead, wounded soldiers were retrieved either by the helicopters that brought them to the front or by dedicated search and rescue craft. They were then taken to a staging area where the most seriously wounded soldiers were evacuated by Medevac helicopters to field hospitals.
When an urgent mission drops, we know that somebody's life is in danger, or it's life, limb, or eyesight that we're trying to save. So the quicker we get out of here and on scene, the quicker we can get the medical attention to and get them back here.
The
whole point of Medevac is rapid movement of the patient from the point of injury to a higher level of care. My job is to maintain the patient while we've got him, while we get him to that higher level of care. And if I can do it, try to improve his situation some.
This job comes with a lot of satisfaction. You know that your job is directly supporting the soldiers on the ground, and you're getting them out of pretty much helping them on the worst day of their lives, make sure they get to make it back home to their families.
Operation Iraqi Freedom was perhaps the last military campaign that will ever utilize the services of a mobile Army surgical hospital.